Κυρίες και κύριοι, καλησπέρα σας. Καλώς ήλθατε σε αυτή την μοναδική παρουσίαση που θα μας κάνει ο αδελφός, γιατί είναι και AHEPA, Νίκος Λαριγάκης από το Washington των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών. Η ομιλία κυρίως θα γίνει στην Αγγλική.
Κυρίως στην Αγγλική.
Θα γίνει στην Αγγλική, αλλά πιστεύω, αδελφέ Νίκο, ότι είστε ελεύθερος να απαντήσετε και στα ελληνικά στις ερωτήσεις, σε κάποιες ερωτήσεις μετά, έτσι.
Μπορεί να σας ρωτήσω στα ελληνικά, εγώ θα σας απαντάω στα αγγλικά.
Όπως το είμαστε δίγλωσσος οργανισμός, όπως νομίζετε. Για τους λίγους που δεν με γνωρίζουν, είμαι ο διδάκτορ Παναγιώτης Διαμάντης και είμαι πολιτιακός γραμματέας της AHEPA εδώ στην Νέα του Ουαλία. Καλώς ήρθατε, όπως είπα, μεγάλη εβδομάδα, school holidays, έπεσαν αρκετά μαζί. Αλλά έτυχε ότι αυτή είναι η μόνη ευκαιρία που έχει ο κ. Λαριγάκης να μιλήσει, να παρουσιάσει δημόσια ομιλία εδώ στο Σίδνεϊ. Ύστερα από περιοδία που ξεκίνησε από το Σίδνεϊ, πέρασε Καμπέρα, στη συνέχεια Μελβούρνη, Πέρθη, πάλι στο Σίδνεϊ και αύριο το πρωί επιστρέφει στις ΗΠΑ. So it's with great pleasure, it's a great honor for us to have Brother Nico Larigakis all the way from Washington to present, as you can see, the United States relationship with both Greece and Cyprus, and particularly focusing on, I hope I can be heard, Carola, yes, I'm heard at the back there. Ακούγομαι, εντάξει. The role of the American Hellenic Institute, of which Mr. Larigakis is, of course, the president and 37 years?
30 years.
30 years involved in various capacities with the American Hellenic Institute, which AHEPA has played a very important role, particularly in the early years of its foundation. Kyrie Genike, thank you for joining us once again. Kyrie Proedre, Politike Proedre, Yanni Kalimani, of course, Kyrie Larigaki. We have with us the member for Canterbury, the Honourable Sophie Kotsis MP, also Sister Sophia, being an AHEPA herself. Mr. John Azarias from the Larigakis Foundation, thank you for joining us. Co-hosts, Mr. Velis and Mr. Vardas, the two Georges, from President and Secretary of the Australian Hellenic Council, at the moment, New South Wales, as well as only. Another George, Mr. Chazivasilis from Okosmos, and Yannis Dramitinos, everybody knows Yanni, from Cosmos as well, thank you for joining us. Mr. Parvoutis, where are you? There you are, from the Hellenic Club of Sydney. Thank you, and who also have forgotten? I hope nobody. I'm going to keep the introductions short. Thank you for coming along. I'll say at the beginning, καλή λαμπρή να έχουμε όλοι. Καλό Πάσχα, που μπήκαμε και στη Μεγάλη Εβδομάδα. Please put the mobiles either off or on silent. Mine's permanently on silent. As everybody knows, tries to call me, because I usually have to call them back, or I just ignore the phone call. Θα καλέσω τώρα τον πολιτικό μας πρόεδρο να δώσει ένα χαιρετισμό. Τον κύριο Γιάννη Καλιμάνη.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, καλησπέρα σας. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It will be a great pleasure tonight hosting one of the prominent figure in America, the president of the American Hellenic Institute, Mr. Larigakis. And thank you, every one of you, for attending to listen what he's going to say. I would like to myself welcome the Consul General, Dr. Stavros Kyrimis. Dr. Kyrimis is always with us in AHEPA. The Member of Parliament, our lovely and continuously supporter, MP Sophie Kotsis. The chairman of the Larigakis Foundation, Mr. Azarias, the co-host, as the Master of Ceremony said, two Georges, the President and the Secretary from the Australian Hellenic Council, representatives from the societies of universities, representatives from and presidents from the all chapters of New South Wales, the chairman of Kostis Palamas, the Post George Lianos, and all of you, as I said earlier, that you with us tonight. We have the pleasure, as I said, to have with us for the first time in Australia, Mr. Larigakis, who spent the last 30 years, as you heard, servicing the Hellenism, and is the liaison officer between Greece, America, and Cyprus. He's going to tell us more about it, but allow me to say it's a long time, since '92, and Mr. Larigakis is the president of the American Hellenic Institute, and his multiple role is to keep promoting Hellenism and be the liaison officers, and a lot of times is that, well, not a lot of times, all the times, he represents the congressman in America direct from the Hellenic issues. On behalf of AHEPA, as you all heard, is also a member of AHEPA, is a brother. I welcome you, Mr. Larigakis, in Sydney, in the beautiful city of ours in Australia. It's a very short stay from what I know. I wish you a very good trip back home, and I hope in the next couple of years, when we move into the new residence and to the new headquarters, the AHEPA here in New South Wales, to be able to give you an invitation from AHEPA to visit us again. Thank you very much.
Καλά κύριε Πρόεδρε. Καλώ τώρα τον κύριο Γιώργο Βελή να μας απευθύνει και αυτός ένα χαιρετισμό εκ μέρους του Ελληνικού Συμβουλίου.
Ευχαριστώ Παναγιώτη. Κύριε Πρόεδρε, ευχαριστώ. Safe Concerts, once again, thank you. Και όλοι οι πρόεδροι, και ιδιαίτερα θέλω να ευχαριστήσω the former treasurer of the Hellenic Council and the former secretary of the Hellenic Council in terms of their invaluable and how lucky you are in terms of their support. As soon as obviously they found out that Mr. Larigakis was coming, they were one of the first. They didn't even hesitate in hosting this function, and thank you for that. The issue in regards to politics, and I'm just going to be 1 minute in regards to the Australian Hellenic Council. You saw the influence that an independent senator from Adelaide had in regards to stopping legislation just last week in regards to Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act that happened in Canberra, and that was through the work, obviously, with all the communities working together in preventing not just one, but 2 prime ministers over a period of 2 years in terms of weakening the Racial Discrimination Act, which would have given the green light to racism. The Australian Hellenic Council we have an advantage in this country in that we represent approximately 3% of the population. Now, with the 3% population representative, this enables the Australian Hellenic Council to, when it goes to Canberra and it lobbies on both Hellenic issues, we have that advantage. In other words, we have the numbers, which assists us. But in Mr. Larigakis' situation, that's not so. Now, although there are approximately 1.5 million Greeks in the United States, if you look at it proportionally, with a population of roughly 330 million Americans, obviously the percentage in terms of voting is a lot less, and hence normally you would have a lobby group that would probably have less influence depending on the proportion of the voting that may be looked at by a politician. But this isn't the case, and this I have to commend, and I can't say enough good words in regards to Mr. Larigakis and the discussions that we had, especially over a 3-hour period driving to Canberra, which was incredibly insightful, and he's an incredibly passionate man, and I thank him for coming in his own time from the United States, and everyone is going to be welcome to a treat tonight into what he has to say, and I'll leave it at that, and you'll understand that through his professionalism and his hard work, he has enabled the Australian Hellenic Institute to be a major player in regards to foreign affairs, the United States, and obviously that is Turkey, Cyprus, and Israel. Cyprus, Israel, and Greece. My apologies. without further ado, I'll let Panayoti hand over.
And I'm sure, thank you, George. I'm sure you all know or would have heard about the trireme, which AHEPA has sponsored to bring to Darling Harbour, to the National Maritime Museum. That's it there. It actually floats above your head as you walk into the museum. The statistics that I've had from the museum so far are just over 10,000 have seen it in the first 10 days. So it's achieving what we wanted. Now, why do I bring this up apart from the AHEPA connection? Is very simple, and I'm sure Mr. Larigakis will talk about it in a second. The soft power that Hellenism has. We have a number of major anniversaries coming up in Hellenic history. All right. Next year is the centenary of the armistice of Mudros, the end of World War I, when the Ottoman Empire surrendered. Mudros is, of course, on Limno, Mudros Harbour. They surrendered on Limno. What are we, as a Hellenic community, going to be doing to contribute to closing the centenary of Anzac celebrations, commemorations next year? In 2020, we have 2,500 years since the Battle of Salamis, hence the trireme. In 2021 is the bicentenary of Hellenic independence, 1821-2021. There are moves underway, both in AHEPA and, of course, under the guidance of His Excellency the Consul General, Dr. Stavros Kyrimis, to begin to prepare from now for these major centenaries events that we are going to do. Now, deliberately I'm speaking in English because we are the ones who are born here in this country who understand Australian society. We're the ones who are going to be driving this. Just like Mr. Larigakis and his compatriots and his co-workers in the States, in Washington especially, are speaking as Americans to an American audience. We are speaking as Australians when we're speaking to an Australian audience. And this is something that the migrant generation need to accept and to understand. Okay. Very briefly, Mr. Larigakis is actually Greek-born, went to the States very young. His family have roots in the United States going back to 1900. So they have a presence there of 117 years. I won't bore you with the details, but we had a very good discussion about it last night over dinner. He's been working, he studied in political science. Politics is his life since his student years. Does this sound familiar? Some of our younger colleagues. He's made it a career now, and he's managed to achieve what some of us still dream about, which is marrying service to Hellenism with career. Actually being able to make a career out of serving Hellenism. You really should look at the American, I made the same mistake you did.
Yeah, exactly.
The American Hellenic Institute website, AHI.org. You will find some, not only just their activities, but just the extent of their activities. It is very much where I believe AHEPA aspires to matching it, but playing it from an Australian point of view. Particularly check out the policy journal that they bring out quarterly. It's all entirely in English. It's downloadable for free, and there's always very relevant articles by specialists on both foreign affairs as well as domestic public policy. Without further ado, I will invite Mr. Larigakis to begin to enlighten us on the work of the American Hellenic Institute.
Ζήτω μια διευκρίνηση στα ελληνικά. Ήξερα γάμα.
Είναι δύο.
It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Πρώτα και κύριο να σας ευχηθώ όλους σας. Καλή μεγάλη εβδομάδα, καλή Ανάσταση, χρόνια πολλά. And now we go into English. It's been a real pleasure for me to be in Australia. My first trip, as you heard others say here tonight. And you know the National Basketball Association, that's the NBA, the Professional Basketball League in the United States? Well, they play basically every 2 nights or every 3rd night in some other U.S. city. Well, the last 12 days that I've been here, I feel like a one-man NBA team because I'm going from city to city to city, and I was also in Perth, by the way, so I've traveled the country back and forth. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. Council General, good to see you. Presidents, George and George, John, Member of Parliament. I feel like there's John, George, and I need a Ringo and a Paul somewhere, and we can have the Beatles here. I also want to shout out, where's the Commodore of the Yacht Club? There he is. I want to shout out and I want to thank him for an incredible fast boat ride for about 2.5 hours, which I was holding on for dear life, but it was very enjoyable. Two Saturdays ago, I guess it was now. It was a beautiful day, and I enjoyed it thoroughly, and so it was one of the highlights of my trip, so I thank you so much for that. AHI and AHEPA really, in many ways, go hand in hand, and I would certainly be remiss if I didn't bring that up here tonight. Well, the American Hellenic Institute was founded in 1974. AHEPA was founded in 1922 in Atlanta, Georgia, for purposes of discrimination regarding the Greeks who were coming from Greece to the United States, and to make them, of course, mainstream as part of the American mainstream, because that was the one way to combat the discrimination. However, it wasn't until Greece helped put the Greek American community on the map, and that was in 1940 when they said ohi. And it was really that seminal moment that changed the entire Greek American community and how it was perceived literally overnight in the United States. And now heroes fight like Greeks. And it was that kind of scenario perpetuated, of course, facilitated by the AHEPA. AHEPA was the organization that raised the most money during the war years for the war bonds that helped in the financing of the war. And it's been a tremendous organization giving back not just to the Greek community in the United States, but back to the mainstream community. If there's a project that the Greek American community needs, AHEPA is there. If there's a philanthropic need that is needed not only in the United States but in Greece or somewhere else, AHEPA is there. So we're very proud of AHEPA and the work that it's done, and you need to be proud of it as well, carrying on the legacy here in Australia as we are in the United States. But for purposes regarding AHI and AHEPA, when Gene Rossidis, the founder of the American Hellenic Institute, a gentleman who was a famous football star at Columbia University, and then went on to have an illustrious career in law with the international law firm of Rogers and Wells in Washington, D.C. He was also Assistant Secretary of State for the Treasury under the Nixon administration. So when July 20th bombs start falling on our brethren Hellenes on the island of the Republic of Cyprus, he could not stand by. He had to get into action. And he founded the American Hellenic Institute to be a professional lobby, to be able to deal with that crisis of the time, but ultimately to go on and to be a professional paid staffed lobby to be able to deal with issues as they may come up as they relate to Greece, Cyprus, and U.S. relations. And you have to do this professionally. Let me get that, I'll get to that back in a minute. But AHEPA, AHI did not have any funding when it first started out independently. So Gene Rossidis famously likes to say, he went to AHEPA and used AHEPA's money, approximately $25,000 at the time, which, you know, this is now 1974, and it was mostly to be able to communicate from the grassroots communities to Congress the rule of law arms embargo. And everyone know what I'm talking about there when I'm saying the arms embargo against weapons, U.S. weapon sales to Turkey because of the illegal invasion and occupation of Cyprus by Turkey. Well, we didn't have emails. We certainly didn't even have faxes. We did have cell phones, so the only way you communicate was either by letter, which took, you know, week, 7 days, whatever it took. So the quickest way was by Western Union and grant, you know, what they call milligrams. That cost money. So a lot of the money was used to be able to directly lobby from the grassroots communities, members of Congress, to support the rule of law arms embargo, which after 12 votes passed and it's one of the most important seminal votes regarding the maturation of the Greek American community in the political mainstream in the United States. And if it wasn't for the help of AHEPA through the funding and the grassroots network of AHEPA, AHI had nothing at the time other than the name and Gene Rosidis' efforts to be able to develop the rule of law memorandum that we went on Capitol Hill and we were able to be successful engaging our friends like John Sarbanes and John Bradamus and William Broomfield and others at the time who were pivotal to the passage of this legislation. So there in itself is the founding of AHI and how AHEPA had a major role in that effect. Since then, we've had tremendous relations with the Order of AHEPA. I'm an AHEPan. Most of our members are AHEPans, if not all of them. And we cooperate on many, many endeavors together in the past, and we will continue to do so in the future. And I'll talk about a little bit of some of the things we're doing right now regarding the Eastern Mediterranean. But let me get back to the lobbying. And this is very important. It was alluded by some of your leaders here tonight, but it needs to be underscored. You can't do professional lobbying on a part-time basis. And as Gene Rosidis said back then, and continues to say now, he's still alive at 90 years old and strong, you can't do it Cafinio style. You can't do it Hoyatica style. You gotta do it professionally. This is what I do. I get paid to do this. And we have 6 other people in the office. We have a 7 paid staff. We have our own building on 16th Street, 4 blocks up from the White House. I encourage you, in every place I've gone to and given this speech, I've said the same thing. You have a tremendous amount of power here. In many ways, much more than what we have in the United States, by virtue of being 3% of the population. We are less than 1/2 of 1% of the population. 1.5 to 2 and out of 330 million. You seem to be a lot more organized in your cities. But you are, I think, to bring it all together, you need this professional paid staff lobby under AHC, if that's the case you want to go, and I would recommend you do that because there's a history. And you do it in Canberra where Parliament and where the federal government is. You don't do it in Sydney, you don't do it in Melbourne, you certainly don't do it in Perth. You do it where the federal government is. And you need to be able to have this to be able to coordinate activities and have all the communities around Australia work in unison by virtue of the organization that's provided by the lobbying office. So I just wanted to stress how important that is to the process. Now lobbying and the way we do it, we have the one-on-one meetings. All the time I'm meeting with people on Capitol Hill, members of Congress, their staffs. Staffs are very important. They're the doorkeepers. You've got to have good relations with the staff. State Department, I'm constantly in contact with the State Department. The State Department, and I'm sure your foreign ministry has the same thing here, they have desk officers. And they have Greece, Turkey, Cyprus. Every country has a desk officer. So we're constantly engaged with them, but also with the Assistant Secretary of State and the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. They go up the chain, reaching up to the Secretary of State. Those are difficult meetings to have with the Secretary of State, if not impossible. But that's okay. The message gets properly brought up the channel by speaking to the people at the Assistant Secretary and the desk level. We're constantly engaged with these people. As of course, as I said, Capitol Hill, including the White House. We do have meetings at the White House with people who are involved. The White House has its own staff people who deal in the region. So you make relations with them, and periodically you reach out to them and have dialogue, because these issues change. They're not stale. They're always changing. Every morning I read a stack this thick that my staff gives me from previous night articles of things that have happened in the region. You have to be on top. Again, the importance of the staff. However, lobbying also takes on other areas. You also have to be in contact with the media. There are articles that are written all the time, or opinion pieces. Most of them tend to be critical of our positions. So you have to write to that. You have to try to get your response in. So AHI does this, and I suggest if you see articles like that in your papers, you address those articles. You send in to set the record straight. General Flynn, who was Trump's National Security Council advisor, wrote a piece On November 8th, the day of the elections, on the Hill, called the Hill, the newspaper that everyone on Capitol Hill reads. It was a very pro-Turkish position paper, article. I immediately the next day drafted a response, and it got published. So you have to address it. And it was such a bad piece, and we're frankly pleased that things have come out since then that he was on the Turkish lobby and payroll and so forth, and he's no longer, of course, there. But you got to be constantly on top of your game regarding these issues. The think tanks are important too. You heard somebody mention think tanks. In Washington, D.C., there are many think tanks. Every one of them has some presentation that they do. We monitor every single one of the events that deal in the Eastern Mediterranean. And there's many of them. We send our staff to put in questions so others can hear them, to see the responses. We have a synopsis of these proceedings, and every 2 months we put all these summaries together and we send them out via email so the community and other people who follow this understand what's going on. And overwhelmingly, ladies and gentlemen, the majority of these presentations, and last year we covered 62, I believe it was, overwhelmingly, I believe 45, if I recall, had to do with some aspect of Turkey. And usually try to paint Turkey in a positive way. So you have to go there and see what others are saying to be able to defend it. However, the key point to direct lobbying with the government and the Congress is that you do it as citizens of the country that you belong to. And that's why we've been successful, and that's why we were successful in '74, because we made it an American argument. We went and speak as American citizens. I am a citizen of the United States of America. I pay taxes there, I vote there, and most likely I will die there. So you have to influence it through that kind of a route. And in the case of 1974, one of the reasons why we were able to be successful was because the argument we made was that when Turkey was using these bombs and these weapons to invade Cyprus illegally, it was not in addition to violation of the NATO Charter, the UN Charter, customary international law, the rule of law, it was also violating U.S. law under what's called the Foreign Assistance Act of 1964, which says that a country that receives weapons from the United States cannot use them in an offensive manner, which Turkey did unilaterally. That is still in place today, this law, and we continuously keep bringing it up because Turkey continues to be in violation every single day they're on Cyprus today, and every single day that they bring over from mainland Turkey any kind of armaments. So you use that argument, and these are the arguments that you have to use here. It's not enough to come up there and say, "Η Μακεδονία είναι ελληνική." Really? They're going to say, okay, so what? You got to make the arguments of why it's in the best interest of the United States or Australia to promote a certain agenda. That's what they want to hear, and we've developed the arguments, and thankfully the arguments are not arguments that we have to make up. Greece provides a strong position for defense for U.S. interests. The message that I've been passing along here, and I'm going to highlight here now, is how important Greece is, along with Cyprus, and the relationship that has developed with Israel over the last 5 years, this trilateral relationship. These three states, led by Greece, in my opinion, okay, make up the frontline states for the promotion of geostrategic interests of the United States, the Western Alliance, and NATO in the Eastern Mediterranean. They are the pillar to promote peace and stability. And they do it unequivocally without asking us to, what's in it for me? Like Turkey always does whenever we ask them to use Incirlik Air Force Base. That's the only thing that Turkey has, and they always use it as a hostage whenever Western Alliance asks something in return. So we promote this. And it's easy to do because Greece is a spender of 2.38% of its GDP on defense. Only one of 5 countries in NATO to do so. Turkey does not spend 2.38 of the GDP. Germany doesn't. Germany spends 1.38. Just when we're talking about, you know, what the troika and all that. In the height, Greece used to spend close to 5% of its GDP during the good economic times. But Greece also has one of the most important military facilities in the entire Eastern Mediterranean. Does anybody know what that is? You know, because you heard. Ceuta Bay. You can actually begin and end right there. Ceuta Bay is more important than any other military facility anywhere in the Eastern Mediterranean, and certainly in Turkey. Ceuta Bay, where I've taken multiple VIP visits, I've taken 5, led delegations there of students and Jewish American groups.
Crete.
I'm sorry, yeah, I should have highlighted. It's in Hania, Crete, on the great island of Crete. And it is, like I said, the most important facility for projecting, again, logistical support and operations for the Middle East, for NATO, and for the U.S. There are 5 facilities there. 5. There's the Greek naval base, which now Greece has moved its naval headquarters to this facility, moving it from Salamina to Ceuta Bay to promote the importance of the facility. There's the 115 fighter wing squadron of F-16s there of the Greek Air Force. Adjacent to that is an American air base. And then you have two military training bases. One is called Namfi, which is the only such facility within Europe and NATO where a NATO country and a friend of NATO can come and ask for permission to use it to practice from surface to air missiles in terms of a practice range. It's the only place you can do it without taking out Big Ben or the Eiffel Tower by accident. It's a very safe place to do this. And then the other one that was founded and paid for by the Greek state is called Maritime Interdiction Operation Training Center. And this is a facility where, again, NATO and other friendly countries come to exercise militarily regarding operations for anti-piracy and anti-terrorism activities. They have these old ships there, and they go through various scenarios, and they train these individuals in terms of how to do this. Exceptional facilities, ladies and gentlemen. No other place in Europe can you find this. And it's also important because an American aircraft carrier is the only place between the Atlantic coast of the United States and the base of Norfolk, Virginia, and in Dubai in the Emirates. That's a distance of about 8,000 miles. It's the only place that an American aircraft carrier can come and safely dock broadside and be replenished and be repaired in case of an emergency. And if you think that's no big deal, you go ask the Americans how big of a deal this is. The case in point was when I was meeting with Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Jonathan Cohen at the State Department a couple of weeks ago. And then he said it the next day openly in a presentation. He said, when the USS Truman had just had some mechanical problems, this was a couple months ago, and they would have had to go to Norfolk. But because it was in proximity to Ceuta Bay, near Ceuta Bay, they went to Ceuta Bay. And they flew in the parts, and they were able to get the ship operational again. What would have taken 6 months if it went to Norfolk, and it would have been out of operation, in a very important area that we need American, naval support. In less than a month, approximately 3 weeks, it was operational again. Hundreds and thousands of visitations of ships of NATO, the U.S., visit this facility every year. I can go on and on. But it's important for me to underscore this, because this is part of what Greece has to offer. And of course, the relationship that exists between the 3 countries. But let me illustrate this as well, because I think it's important you understand what Americans are saying right now. And this was the U.S. ambassador, Mr. Pyatt, a very fine ambassador, one of the finest U.S. ambassadors we've had in Greece in recent years. This was from a Kathemeni article, interview. He says, and I quote, "Greece is an important pillar of stability and democratic values in a region that faces numerous security challenges. The United States is appreciative of the close cooperation and the mutual support we have with our Hellenic allies. We participate regularly in joint military exercises. Our students work together on combined military education, and moreover, we train together. In fact, American and the Greek forces have trained together more in the past year than any other point in recent history. Our ability to use the facilities at Suda Bay is a critical contribution to how the United States addresses areas of mutual security concern in the region. And then he goes on to say, Americans nickname Suda Bay as, quote, the best in the Med, end of quote. I wanted to read this so you understand again the importance of this. Now again, there are other issues, obviously. You know, Cyprus is a very important issue for us, and we've been following the negotiations there very closely. And again, we call out Turkey for not helping the process, because as negotiations have gone on between Misrak and G, the Turkish Cypriot leader, and President Anastasiadis, it was ultimately going to come to a wall, and that wall is Turkey. As long as Turkey and Mr. Erdogan continue to call for the troops to be there, which this occupation has been illegally for 43 years, and they continue to want to have guarantees, becomes a non-starter to move this issue forward. So we call on our government, the United States, to put pressure on Turkey. We call on them to call on the European Union and to intercede on our behalf of the European Union. And I call on you to intercede with your policymakers and government here in Australia, and to ask them, and whenever fora they're available, to have contacts with Turkey to bring this issue up as well. And I know about Gallipoli. I know about Gallipoli. But the point is this: Australia is, notwithstanding where it lies geographically on the Pacific Rim, is a Western-oriented, democratic country that believes in the rule of law and Western values and principles and human rights. If you do, then you have to act on it. And you, 850,000 or so Greeks in this country, should be able to push that needle a little further along. And intercede, and have your government intercede whenever they're having any contacts with Turkey at the UN or anywhere else to make this point. And together I think we can put enough pressure for Turkey to move forward. The ecumenical patriarchate issue is an issue we've dealt with, and right now it's being challenged again. My understanding is that Mr. Erdogan is looking to go to St. Sophia this Friday. He's called to try to put it back into a mosque, and the Christian world needs to react in unison. That's not a Greek issue, this is a Christian issue. You saw what happened yesterday with the Coptics in Egypt. These things just cannot go unchallenged. You know, the Christians are being challenged throughout the Middle East, and the Christian world needs to come together at its religious leadership level and call this out and put pressure on these who perpetrate this. I can go on into Q&A and more about the patriarchy if you want me to go on. The Macedonian name issue, I know a lot of people are interested in this issue. The message that we bring home to Washington is, hey, Greece has made a 180-degree concession from its original concession of its original point where it said, we will not accept any name under the name Macedonia. Greece has made that concession, geographic qualifier, and so forth, and a compound name that could include the name Macedonia. Mr. Gruevski has promoted nationalism and irredentist policies regarding Greece. And the United States, which, in my opinion, just disgracefully under the Bush administration in 2004, when they went and recognized this entity under its so-called constitutional name, put Greece in a difficult position that it can never come out of in terms of negotiations. Because once you had the United States recognize it, all bets were off. And then now we have over 100 countries that have recognized it. It's difficult for Gruevski to ever agree to come and to negotiate in proper good faith regarding this particular issue. But now, here's a country that's fallen apart, if you're following anything at all regarding the Balkans. Powder keg, Balkan, round 20. Okay, it's going to happen again. There hasn't been a government there for almost 18 months. You have two Albanian nationalist parties, one to form a coalition government with the Social Democrats. The president, which is being coerced by Mr. Gruevski from behind the scenes, is not allowing for them to have a government. So we have this incredible turmoil that's going on right now in Fyrom. The Albanian Prime Minister is moving in and trying to influence the situation. And how long before this country breaks apart and has the potential to have a spillover again into the entire peninsula of the Balkans? These are issues that we monitor and we try to bring to the forefront as much as possible to interest. Nobody's paying attention to the Balkans. Nobody's paying attention to the Middle East. But guess what? It's coming. And it's coming fast. And it's always better to prevent a crisis than to react to a crisis. And policies help to move that forward. Invasions and incursions in Greek space. I didn't mention it, and I should. You've seen, again, how Turkey creates instability in the region. A very important part of that is they continuously try to challenge Greece's territorial integrity by violations of airspace and sea lanes. In January 29 through February 4, in 1 week, in 1 day, there was 138 violations in 1 day. And it's also important to note that every time this happens, of course, the Greek state has to send out planes to chase out the Turks. Well, in the time when Greece is going through an economic crisis and a migratory crisis, again, attributed to Turkey and their Ole policy, looking the other way in Ole across the Aegean, to the nearby islands, where now 60,000 are still in Greece, by the way. But it costs the Greek state approximately €500 million a year to chase out its NATO ally from its skies. Just another important point to be aware of. Moving up real quickly here. What do you do sometimes? The question is, what are you doing for me lately? And we've been always trying to keep up with what's going on, and you need to be relative and credible because of things always are changing. During the economic crisis, although AHI does not get involved in the Greek domestic agenda, that's not our mandate, the economic crisis was happening. You cannot deal in the vacuum. So we looked at ways that we can be helpful to the Greek state regarding the economic crisis. So we looked at what programs exist under the US government that could potentially be helpful to Greece in its long-term mission to get out of this economic crisis. And the one we came up with was the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. It's an agency of the US government, OPIC for short, not the petroleum folks, in the Middle East, but the American agency. This is an agency that the president is appointed by the President of the United States, and his task is to help American businesses who want to invest in third world countries, developing countries, with preferable interest rates and also other such incentives that they offer, including security on the investment. So hey, let's get Greece on here. There's no investment in Greece. Practically zero statistically. For most of the world, but exclusively from the United States, it's almost zero exclusively. So they wrote back, Greece doesn't belong in there because European Union country, per capita income of 18,000 per year, no dice. Well, we wrote back, but Mrs. Littlefield, the president under the Obama administration, we identified that, hey, Malta was in, beneficiary of OPIC programs, Portugal, a beneficiary of OPIC programs, and Northern Ireland, a beneficiary of of OPIC programs. So it's not just economic criteria, it's political as well. So we engaged our friends on Capitol Hill, the Congressional Hellenic Caucus of Gus Bilirakis and Carolyn Maloney, and after a year and a half of lobbying hard and engaging our friends on Capitol Hill, the letter came to us in July of 2016. Greece now is an OPIC. I've created a vehicle. I gave that vehicle, and I gave it to the leadership of the Hellenic Initiative, which many of you are aware of, and I don't need to get into the details of that, because they come in contact with a lot of prominent Greek business people around the world, and they have a vested interest in terms of their agenda to help the Greek economy. And we said, here, take it, and hopefully you can now move it forward. So these are some of the things. Very quickly, we have a Future of Hellenism in America conference that we host every year. And it's really because of this conference that I'm here today. Because Con Barbadas, which I don't know how many of you are aware of, he's from Perth. He is a businessman there and involved with AHC. He's come to this conference for the last 7, 8 years. And after the last one, he says, look, I'd like to arranged for you to come and to visit Australia and to speak to our communities and travel throughout the country, which is why the reason I'm here. So we take this conference to different U.S. cities every year with the express purpose of exactly what the conference says. The future of Hellenism in America, by definition. It's changing. It's changing here too. But it's changing, I think, more rapidly there. Demographically, we're small, and we have no more infusion from Greece. Even though maybe they'd like to come, the immigration laws are very strict. So it's not easy to come anymore and just come to the United States. So when all marriages in the church that take place are between 80 and 90%, that's all I need to tell you. But I'm not saying that, and don't think of it as a negative. I'm stating it as a fact. But we use this. We don't use this in a negative. We use it as in a positive. By able then to expand Hellenism and bringing in the Philhellenes and engaging them within our community. After all, Philhellenes have been a core central theme to the progress of the Hellenistic world really for the last God knows how many thousands of years. It's important. So, but nonetheless, there's challenges. So we have this conference, which we do under our foundation, and we take it in different cities, and we try to engage the community so to understand where we're going. Education, the language, the politics, the lobbying, and so forth and so on. Then, and I'll end with this. We have, been doing this for 30 years. And again, the audience I'm looking at here tonight, not to be disrespectful to anybody, but the average age here is not up. It's not down, it's up. And that's a problem we face in the United States. And if we don't have our next generation be interested in these issues, we're going to have a heap of problems. Now, cultural, dances, pop culture, we're right there. In the United States, we have dance competitions all over the place. And they attract hundreds of Greek American kids. And they have competitions for 3 and 4 days in these dance festivals. And we got these Greek film festivals where thousands come, and so forth and so on. But you start talking about these issues, and they all disappear from the hills. But yet, whenever all of us, or any of us get together around the table to eat dinner or socialize, guess what? We're not talking about dances. We're not talking about Thanos Petrelis, okay? We're talking about this. So therefore, it is important we engage our next generation. So, excuse me one second. So we came up with a program 9 years ago, which we take every year 10 students from universities to Greece and Cyprus and Washington for a 17-day odyssey, which I lead. And the specific purpose of this trip is to engage them in the understanding and the awareness of the issues that we as an organization are advocating. Period. There's no cultural activities and there's no sightseeing. You want to go see the Parthenon, I tell them, you can do it whenever you have a down moment, and that's not too many minutes, but they do have downtime if they want to see it. Our main focus is these issues. So we have a vetting process. They apply the usual criteria, grade point averages, letters of recommendation, and they write an essay as to why they want to participate in the trip. We choose the 10 from 10 different universities, and off we go. And we pay for the trip, except for their transportation back and forth. That's about $2,500. But I want them to pay that so they have a small investment in the program. This costs us about $45,000. I take 10 kids, myself, and one other staff person, as a chaperone. We start in Washington. We go to White House, Capitol Hill, Greek Embassy, Cyprus Embassy, State Department, and other people who could have something to provide to them. Then we go to Greece, Cyprus, 5 days. Again, no classroom stuff. We meet with people who are doing the job. We meet with Mr. Andreas Mavrogiannis, the chief negotiator. We meet with a person who's been for 30 years digging up bones of individuals and trying to find and identify the 1600 that are still missing in Cyprus from 1974, and we see skeletons on tables. We meet with the foreign ministry people and we have these deep discussions. And it's most importantly, we go to the occupied area and we stand in desecrated churches and they see this. And these churches now are homes for pigeons. Others are casinos or shops. What they're not is churches. And I've taken where you see two cemeteries side by side. The Muslim cemetery, it's immaculate, as the way it should be, to be respectful. And then there's the Orthodox cemetery, Christian next to it, and the headstones have been broken and the bodies have been exhumed. And I take them to Famagusta. And I take them on the beach and we walk the beach, the stretch. And in front of us, people are swimming, umbrellas are up, and people are drinking these beautiful tall glasses of nice cool drinks with umbrellas in them. And exactly 50 yards behind me, behind us, there's a barbed wire fence that fences off an entire city as far as the eye can see, which is a dead city and has been since '74, and buildings are bombed out and decrepit. And we go to the old Nicosia airport where a lot of the fighting took place. And it's like stepping back in time. You see bullet holes still to this day in the building. You still see advertisements inside through the windows that have been sitting and laying on the walls since '74. You see a plane that's been bombed out that says Cyprus Airways on it. Well, when you see these things, it changes you. You can read about them, you can lecture about them, until you see them, you feel them, it doesn't work. We go to Greece and we do it all over again. I take them to Suda Bay. I take them and get briefings from the top generals of Greece on Greece's defensive position. We meet the foreign ministry at all levels. The president of Greece always meets with us, and on and on and on and on. And I make ambassadors. And there's so many great stories from this program. And we've changed at least 15 lives that I know of in terms of they've come back and they've gone into different political directions and international relations fields. So it's an important program, one that you can adopt here to your own students, to adapt it in a way that is helpful to you. I wanted to bring it up. I'll leave it here. I'll keep it for, I know, I'm sorry, I apologize, I spoke too much, but there's a lot of things that we do. And believe me, I just really touched on a very small portion of all the multifaceted agenda of the Institute. I apologize. Everyone was supposed to get a copy of this. Somehow didn't get through properly transposed. And, but you can find it on our website. This is our 2016 annual report. You can find it on our website. You can see all the multifaceted things that we've done. And including, you can find the report that we did with one of these students at Lexington Institute, where this girl started working a couple of years ago, one of our students, and we engaged this think tank in Washington to do this 20-page white paper specifically on Suda Bay. And we passed this around to policymakers, and we had a rollout on Capitol Hill where the Greek Defense Minister Kamenos was in town, and he gave the opening segment to this, and 150 policymakers from Washington were there to hear about Suda Bay. I can go on, but again, I thank you so much. I will take Q&A as much as you like to give. I'll be able to respond. But thank you so much.
Να πάρει και μια ανάσα και ο αδερφός Νίκος. Ναι, σίγουρα. Ένα πράγμα θα σας πω, όσοι έχετε κινητά, η ομιλία ολόκληρη όπως την ακούσατε και όπως την ακούμε τώρα είναι χάρη στην εφημερίδα Ο Κόσμος και στον φίλο τον Γιάννη τον Δερμητινό, είναι τώρα στο Facebook. Για αυτούς που δεν προλάβαν να έρθουν απόψε για διάφορους λόγους, πείτε τους να πάνε στο Facebook ή της AHEPA ή του Ινστιτούτου, θα το μοιράσουμε μετά, ή του Κόσμου, για να ακούσουν ολόκληρη την ομιλία αυτούσια όπως την ακούσατε εσείς απόψε και τις ερωτήσεις τώρα την κουβέντα που θα κάνουμε, όσο αντέξει η μπαταρία του κινητού, έτσι. Έχει μπαταρία, έχει μπαταρία. Λοιπόν, πρώτη ερώτηση. Δημήτρη.
Θα ήθελα να ξέρω, αν μπορείτε να μας πείτε, τι ρόλο παίζει το American Hellenic Institute, τι ρόλο παίζει το American Hellenic Institute in regard of the Parthenon sculptures and the repatriation to Greece. I haven't heard you talk about it at all. So another question last slide. I've got to finish this.
Sure.
So, the American Hellenic Institute, in regard of the Parthenon sculptures and the repatriation to Greece. I haven't heard you talk about it at all. So another question last slide. I've got to finish this.
We don't take an active role in that because we don't deal in the cultural dimension of the issues. However, if the situation presents itself on Capitol Hill through legislation that it has in the past, there are organizations that have put forth legislation on Capitol Hill regarding the Parthenon marbles, we will support it. But we don't take an active role in that because we're not a cultural-based organization. There are other organizations that are doing exclusively work on this issue, and we defer to them. The same reason why we don't get involved in a lot of business stuff. Even though AHI did 14 doing business in Greece conferences in the early days, and we had 3 volumes on doing business in Greece, we stopped doing it because we can't necessarily, with our resources, be able to deal with everything. And there are other organizations, including Chambers of Commerce and other business organizations, that are doing a better job because that's what they do exclusively. And like Capital Link, and you can Google Capital Link and you can see all the great conferences that they do to promote business in Greece.
I asked the question because of all the involvement that you have in all different areas. I thought this would be one of the main ones to help there. And the other question is that I have, are you employed, are you paid by the American, are you under the American finance, or the Greeks of America pay your wages and your office expenses?
We are not a lobby of the Greek government or the Cyprus government. We don't get a dime from those governments. Okay, we are not a lobby. Remember I said earlier that we lobby as American citizens? And when I go speak to a member of Congress, I'm not a hired gun. I speak as an American citizen. If I was getting paid, I would have to be then registered as a foreign agent and go to the Department of Justice and say I am getting paid and I'm working as a lobbyist of the Greek state. There's nothing wrong with that, and we encourage the Greek state, as we have encouraged the Greek state to do this, because Turkey does. So no, our funding comes exclusively from memberships, and if anyone wants to become a member, here's the applications here. So it's memberships and fundraising that we do. And we have about a $700,000 a year budget, 7 full-time people, in a building. Now, if you think $700,000 is a lot of money to do this work in Washington, D.C., the Jewish Americans and their organization called AHEPA, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, the leading Jewish lobby in Washington, has 125 full-time people and about a $25 million annual budget. Thank you.
Nick, in regards to transient rights, can you give us an example of how Turkey behaves in regards to NATO and how many, and in terms of Greece's, 2 questions, and the second question is in regards to Greece's capacity in aerial in regards to F-16s and so forth?
Oh. Well, one of the things we try to portray is not only just in terms of what a faithful ally Greece is, we also try to explain what an unfaithful ally Turkey is. Because you got to make both arguments, frankly, in my opinion, because Turkey has lobbyists. And they spend $40 million a year in Washington, well, in the United States. On political lobbying, they spend probably about 2.5 to 3. But they spend a lot of other lobbying in think tanks and creating Turkish chairs in universities. And they have one lobby, a law firm in Pennsylvania. They pay $60,000 a month to do just one thing. And that's to bring up lawsuits against Mr. Gulen to try to keep him always on the run. But get back to the question. There was a time where, if you look, you can go back to World War I, go through World War II, go through the Cold War, and you can find all sorts of things where Turkey has not been a faithful ally. But let's take it a little more contemporary. The last Gulf War. Forget about the fact right now they facilitated ISIS, they gave genesis to ISIS, they helped fund ISIS, and so forth and so on. But a very specific point, though, was during the Second Gulf War, when the United States wanted a transient rights to Turkey to go and create a northern front to incur the incursions. Well, Turkey wanted to negotiate money with the United States to allow it for transient rights. Now, this is a beneficiary of a country which has received hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. foreign and military aid over the years. And is supposed to be a faithful NATO ally. Well, they wanted $26 billion for transient rights. And the Bush administration, under Defense Secretary of State Paul Wolfowitz, stupidly enough, had agreed to do this. On the 11th hour, they jacked up the price. They said we want another $6 billion for $32 billion. And then the deal fell through. And then you had, for example, White House officials, unnamed, but as reported by the New York Times, that said, and I quote, extortion in the name of alliance. This is Turkey. And the question about the F-16s? Yeah, Greece, to give you an idea again, Greece is a major procurer of American-made weapons. They have 165 F-16s. That makes it the 5th largest fleet of F-16s in the world. Now, Greece is the size of the state of Alabama and has a population of a little bit more than New York City. Not New York State, New York City. New York City has 7 million, Greece has 11 million. That's Greece. Yet it's almost like a small mini superpower in the Balkans in terms of the amount of firepower that it has. And believe me, this is a very efficient military, takes its commitment very seriously to NATO, and never uses as a hostage, okay, what it is asked to do as a NATO ally, unlike, again, Turkey.
Okay, if I may, I would just like to ask what the American Hellenic Institute...
Oh, there you go.
Sorry. I would just like to ask what the American Hellenic Institute's position is with regards to the Turkish coup, first. Furthermore, I would also like to ask where you, as well as the Institute, stand on Greece's reception of the Kemalist officers and the helicopter pilots, which came in the final waning hours of the coup in July 2016.
No, we have no position. That's not, that's not an area that we would put out an official statement on. Certainly, we're not going to put out anything that's happening internally to Turkey, internally within their own, political and military situation. That's not where we go. Our job is the American establishment, and the same thing goes true with there was 7 or 8 officers, I forget how many there are, regarding that went in to seek asylum in Greece, and so forth. We condemn, of course, Mr. Erdogan for trying to use this to try to be more provocative regarding Greece. Our question and things like Luzon, being more provocative with flights in the Aegean and so forth. Now we know he's also doing this because he's trying to engage his nationalistic base, to get strength for the upcoming April 16th vote and so forth. But nonetheless, he's a very dangerous game. He's a very dangerous person, in my opinion. And the U.S. and the Western Alliance really needs to be very careful regarding the current and future impending actions by Turkey, which can continue to threaten the peace and stability in the region.
What is the April 16 vote?
That's for Erdogan to become the next president and be the supreme president. Ev understands the word supreme president. Well, this is Mr. Erdogan now. Anybody else? And I'll leave it up to the moderator, the chairman, in terms of how many questions you want to ask.
Hi. We've seen the success of the Jewish and the pro-Israeli lobby in the United States. What lessons do you think our diaspora, both in the United States and Australia, can learn from them and their success and their institutional framework in representing the issues of the diaspora to our governments in both the United States and Australia?
Look, the Jewish lobby is second to none in the United States. You heard me say, for example, how much resources they allocate to defend and promote Israel in the United States. Just one, AIPAC spends the amount of money and has the amount of people, but there are others. There's the American Jewish Committee, there's B'nai B'rith, there's an umbrella of 50 Jewish American organizations, all of them in unison, in addition to anti-defamation and anti-Semitic actions that continue to still be profound in certain areas of the United States. The number one goal is to promote Israel, and they do it exceptionally well. So, but they have something that we don't have, and thankfully we don't have. And that is they have a country that's literally constantly under siege. If you go to Israel, like I've been to Israel, they have safe rooms in their houses. They give out gas masks. And they have what's called an Iron Dome system that knocks out missiles that are fired into Israel. And in some cases, it could be as many as 1,000 a year. That's a different equation. Thankfully, those things don't happen in Greece. We have these overflights, but no one is shooting rockets into the country. And no one is calling for the elimination and the wiping out of the state of Greece the way Iran and other countries promote that agenda. So it's more easy to be able to activate, the Jewish lobby in that regard. For our purposes, is what I said earlier, to be able to create and to strengthen the U.S.-Cyprus relationship that exists. In a couple of weeks, there's a major military exercise that's taking place off the coast of Crete near Suda Bay. It's called Noble Dina. This is an annual military exercise between Greece, Israel, and the United States. These are important. We, at the Greek American community level, we are in touch with our Jewish American friends, and AHEPA, AHI, and the B'nai B'rith, and the president of major conference of major Jewish American organizations, it's an umbrella of all the Jewish American organizations, we've established a biannual trip that we go every January, every 2 years, and the next one's coming up in 2018, where we go to Israel, Greece, and Cyprus and meet at the highest level of the governments of these 3 countries to, again, illustrate the way we feel of the importance of this relationship, to reinforce it in the region, but more importantly, to come back to Washington and to express that to our policymakers, thereby reinforcing it in the United States from the diaspora organizations, how important we feel regarding this relationship.
Mr. Larigakis, thank you very much thank you very much for that talk. As Mr. and Greg, thank you for the way you present us, the great work you guys do. I have 2 questions. The first one is, given Greece's consistent contribution to NATO and the way that we have kind of gone above and beyond our expectations, given our financial situation in things such as the migrant crisis, etc., I'd like to touch upon something you mentioned earlier, which is that when articles are written about Greece, they usually quite often tend to be of a somewhat critical nature. I wanted to ask what your opinion is on this and why you think this may happen, if you think we might be perhaps suffering from a PR problem, if we're not marketing ourselves well enough as such. And the second question that I would have for you is also, what is your personal opinion of Greece's relationship with America, especially under the Trump leadership, and moving forward into kind of a new era of geopolitics?
Look, Greece needs to have a better PR campaign, there's no doubt about it. I mean, for example, you heard me talk about the lobbyists in Washington that Turkey has and Greece does not have. Hopefully that will change soon. But it's not just lobbying, you've got to have also public relations and marketing. And that involves the business component, and it also involves, okay, the tourism component and so many other components. I mean, look, for example, everyone knows the American Super Bowl, right? You know, about 130 million watch this thing on a Sunday afternoon in early February. Well, guess what? About a half an hour of the pregame show, which again, maybe 70 million or 80 million watch, was sponsored exclusively by Turkish Airlines. How many of you have seen European championships in FIBA basketball or whatever, and what do you see on the parquet on the floor? Turkish Airlines. Okay? All I'm saying is PR is important. Look, why have I started this campaign regarding Suda Bay? Because 5 years ago, I'm sitting on a dais in Tarpon Springs, Florida, where it's like about as Greek as it gets, for Greek Independence Day. And there's a U.S. Senator there from Florida. I won't mention his name because we're on camera. Okay? But this person, okay, I engaged him in a conversation. And I started talking about Suda Bay. And guess what? He thought I had 2 heads, basically. I mean, like, what, Suda Bay? I've never heard of it. Now, that's not completely unusual in 535 members of Congress not to know certain things. Now, if he was some senator that was from a, the middle of the country where, farm subsidies and those kind of things are very important, I can almost understand it. But he was a member of the Armed Services Committee of the United States Senate. It is his business to know where American military assets are around the world. And he did not know. So therefore I said, man, if he doesn't know, I can only imagine what the learning curve is like for the rest. So that's when I really started pushing and engaging and trying to promote Suda Bay and what it does. And it's permanent. You saw the comment by the ambassador? He also talked about it in his testimony before he got confirmed. He never heard about Suda Bay in any of these conversations before we really started doing this, in my opinion. And I'll take credit for it in terms of the Institute. I don't give a damn what anybody says. Okay, because it's still, at the time we started doing this, it wasn't being talked about. Everyone knew it from the defense side, but the guys on Capitol Hill certainly did not. And I'm sorry, what was the other question real quick?
Same question. What's your view on Greece's relationship with the US under Trump and heading into a new era of geopolitics?
Look, I do see, I mean, you heard me say the comments of the ambassador. He obviously represents the Trump, represents the President of the United States. Although he was appointed by the Obama administration, he will be carried over and he has to be there. And thankfully he is. He's a good ambassador and he will continue to promote this relationship. I do see some movements. I see the United States wanted to upgrade Studebake's status. To do this, they want to change the defense cooperation agreement from a yearly lease to a 5-year lease for obvious reasons. And the Greek government wants to do this too. Mr. Kamenos, the defense minister of Greece, came to Washington and had a very good meeting with the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Mr. General Mattis. They came out and they, again, Mattis talked about Studebaker and talked about what a great ally is, Greece is, and so forth. So I do see some good things developing, but we don't know completely where the direction is going because Secretary of State Rex Tillerson went to Turkey just a couple of weeks ago. And I wrote him a letter before he went, as we do with anybody who's a U.S. official who visits Greece, Turkey, and Cyprus, to put forth certain things we want them to be aware of and to bring up. And he came, and the statements that I read, were like, almost business as usual with Turkey. So when I get back, I want to have a meeting, hopefully, with the people at the State Department and try to understand exactly what was said during the visit of Mr. Tillerson. So stay tuned.
Thank you for such a tremendous enlightenment on ethnic affairs that we all were interested in. My question might be bordering a bit stupid, I suppose, but somebody said to me that if you ask a stupid question, you'll be stupid 1 minute. If you don't ask the question, you'll be stupid all your life. So therefore, you spoke earlier about the children that they're disinterested, I think, if I've got it correctly, in our ethnic affairs and so on and so forth. In your opinion, would you say that this disinterest attitude that their children have, Greek American children, and of course Greek Australian children, would you say that there may be disillusion because of the events in our motherland, the way the government is run and the way the political system is run and the way things are done there, because our children, they visit their motherland and some of them, they come back very disillusioned? Thank you.
Look, no, I don't think there's a disillusionment factor involved. I just think there's an awareness factor involved. Look, from the East Coast of the United States, you hop on a plane, as I do 7 times a year, and a lot of other Greeks do as well, in a very short 8, 9.5, 10-hour later flight, comparatively how far you have to fly from Australia, that's like, just a short hop. You're in Greece. The sun is shining, the beaches are full of great-looking people, and the nightclubs are even with better-looking people. And everyone's having a good time, happy-go-lucky. And that still exists today, by the way. Maybe not to the stage where it was before, but you would never know there's a deep economic crisis there by looking at things on the surface. And I really believe that. Okay, because I said I visit there almost collectively 2 months out of the year. There are problems there, and we don't need to go into those right now. But outward appearances are still such. So they don't view that there's a problem here. They don't know that as they're maybe bathing, in one of the great beaches of some Greek island, that a Turkish jet is flying overhead and is engaged in a mock dogfight with a Greek fighter. But this happens on a daily basis. Not necessarily mock dogfights, but incursions into Greek airspace and Greek territory in the water. Or that, Skopje permeates propaganda that shows maps, okay, that Greece is occupying its territory, and those maps show a map that goes all the way down to Larissa, for example. Or that the Ecumenical Patriarchate, a spiritual leader of 300 million Orthodox Christians, of which they are under his jurisdiction in the United States, as you are here too, I believe, okay, he can't practice religious freedom. But yet there's a law that's under the International Religious Freedom Act of the United States that was passed in 1998 by then Bill Clinton, and it was passed unanimously, that says that a perpetrator of religious violations who is an ally of the United States, the U.S. President has to act upon it. And there's 1 through 15 enumerated actions from less severe to more severe that a president can engage on. I haven't seen any U.S. president engage in any of these enumerated actions, but we remind them of this constantly as it relates to the ecumenical patriarchate. And I'm an archon as well. So there is a huge learning curve. So if we make these students aware and make them understand these issues, they act on it, and I think I gave you a little bit of a small sample, snapshot. And that's just from a small 90 kids sampling, because we can't take more than that. You know, we can just afford to do 1 trip a year. But I've seen miracles just in this small program. I had one kid, now this is a little bit extreme. In the first year, and I was saying this last night, had never been to Greece before. You know, he goes to the University of Wisconsin, you know, Midwest, not a word of Greek, nothing. I'd never been there. He went on this trip, and he got so passionate. He got so angry at what he heard and what the Dutch were doing. He was ready to go enlist in the Greek army the next day, and I'm not joking. Okay, now it's a little over the top, but you understand the point I'm trying to make. One last point, you know, it's a great story. I need to share it. I shared it last night. There's a kid who from the University of Pennsylvania, exceptional talent. His name is Elias Gerasoulis. I don't remember too many of these kids' names because you know, I'm getting to the age where I just can't remember names anymore. This kid I remember. He was one of our most exceptional students about 2 years ago. Now, if you saw him though, okay, you thought that he had just walked off the plane from mainland China because his characteristics are Asian. His father from Greece, his mother from China. They met at the University of Rutgers in New Jersey. They married and had this child. The child had never been to Greece. Only once he had traveled outside the United States. This kid was exceptional on the trip. But more importantly, he got to visit Greece for the first time. And the president of Greece, Robles, engaged him in a discussion because he found him so fascinated. And you should see the exchange that was going on. But he was excited because he got to meet his relatives. He went to visit the Parthenon on his own. He learned about Greek culture. And when he came back, in addition to all the things that he did at the University of Pennsylvania, including writing an article and being interviewed that was on the front page of a major Ivy University of the United States, talking about his trip, again, the education component, I had him come and speak at my Future of Hellenism conference. Because I always have a panel on this conference where I have 3 young Greek professionals, a student, and maybe somebody in their 20s. Talk about what does Hellenism mean for them? How do they view Hellenism moving forward into this 21st century? And this kid gave an exceptional presentation. You can find it on YouTube. Elias Gerasoulis speech, American Language Foundation, you'll find it. But his father came up to me later and says, Mr. Larigakis, he goes, I really want to thank you. I said, for what? He says, my son gravitated mostly towards his mother's culture, which is nothing wrong, it's a great culture. But I couldn't get him to understand at all and to care at all about his Greek side. You've made that happen. And he says, since he's been back from the trip, he can't stop talking about the trip and about what to do about Greece. On his own, the following year, he goes and gets an internship for the delegation of the European Union, for the United Nations, the Greek delegation to the United Nations in New York, and has an internship for the whole summer. And he's now constantly thinking about how he can do things to promote the things he learned on the trip. I took a little bit of time, but I think the example was an important one to mention. Let's take one more question because I'm losing my voice.
Good evening. The previous question, I think, was a bit of a segue towards mine. You mentioned the students that go on the trips that then progress on to careers in politics. What's the retention rate for their continued participation in the Institute? And is there, I guess, a particular angle that is used to sort of promote their ongoing involvement in the Institute as obviously life goes on and other ambitions and priorities take their place?
Look, it's a good question. We don't necessarily have the resources to be able to have a permanent person who's always following the activities of what these students are doing. And that's just the reality. You just can't do this with only, what's really three. We have seven staff people. Only 3 are in the building. The other 4 do things like accounting, which is outsourced, web support, which is outsourced, and so forth. But we make every effort, and we encourage them to get engaged with us and to let us know what they're doing, and if we can be of help to them in some way, then we continuously progress them in terms of what their interests are. And this kid Rasulis, he did seek my assistance in terms of putting together with some people to be able to get that internship, for example. But we encourage them, let us know what you're doing. I mean, I found out of the blue, there's one girl, who, another great talent. She got she was an intern with this one online foreign policy journal in Washington, and she wrote an entire ebook for this magazine on Cyprus and the Cyprus issue. We published that, obviously. She went and interviewed the government spokesperson when he was in Washington, and they had that interview in one of the magazines. There's others who went on and became interns at the U.S. embassies in Athens and in Nicosia. Others went on Capitol Hill and became staff people. And others, as I said, went on to think tanks and so forth. So we try as much to monitor them, and we certainly, if they come in contact with us and ask us how we can help them, we make every effort to help them. So.
Okay, Nick, I'm going to indulge you with one last question.
Yeah.
Wait, one last question. You can talk.
Right, all right.
Στην αρχή της ομιλίας σας είπατε ότι έχετε επισκεφθεί σχεδόν τις περισσότερες πολιτείες της Αυστραλίας. Μιλήσατε με αρκετά σωματεία και οργανισμούς. Μεταξύ των οργανισμών και των σωματείων της Αυστραλίας και της Αμερικής έχετε δει καμιά διαφορά? Κρατάμε πράγματι τα ήθη, τα έθιμά μας, την κουλτούρα μας?
Ναι, όντως, σίγουρα το βλέπω. I was looking at the newspaper today that was shown. What's the one you showed me? No, the other one. I think it was
Hellenic Herald.
Well, there was a center spread of the Opera House, and what seemed to be like thousands of Greeks celebrating Greek Independence Day. That's well, I think from what I've seen, in every place. Look, you got Cyprus houses, you got AHEPA houses, you got Hellenic centers, okay? You got Pan-Macedonian centers. They're all over the place. And from where I go, it's like, you see this block? There's like, Greeks own, hundreds of millions of real estate, And that casino we saw in Canberra, the Hellenic club. That was unbelievable. We don't got things like this in the United States. Let me tell you something. Hellenism is alive and well, and the spirit of Hellenism is alive and well in Australia, as it is in the United States in a different way. But, and if I can end on maybe even on this note, Greeks in Australia, and I would say Greeks in the United States, we, along with the Jewish American community, we are number 1 and 2 in per capita income and achievement, education. And I would put achievement in that because that's how the economic thing goes up. I would probably venture to say you're extremely high here as well. Why? Why? Because I think there's a pisma involved, and there's no way in hell we're going to go back to our homes in Greece and our villages and say we're not successful. Okay? Okay? For sure. Okay? Okay? But, okay, it's ego. And I say it in a good sense. You need the ego to be successful, to have high achievement. It's absolutely essential of the yin and yang component, okay, regarding taking this path. That ego, though, works against us, in my opinion, collectively, when it's a common goal we need for the community at large.
Unfortunately.
You need to take care of your business and not worry about what Sydney is doing or what Perth is doing or the Greek community of Canberra. This is what I tell people in the United States. Well, these issues, and they get caught up in all these issues I just talked about, and it becomes overwhelming. And I say, no, don't worry about the entire picture. You deal with your government officials and your members of Congress locally, like this member of Parliament and others. You here in Sydney deal with them. Let the Melbourne people deal with those in Melbourne, the Perth in Perth, Adelaide, and so forth. And then the whole picture fills in. And to fasuli yemizi to sakuli, as they say. Okay? And that's how this should be. You don't worry about what other communities are doing. Worry about what you are doing. And if you take care of your business, the whole thing fills in, and it becomes a collective good for the entire community. And there's no way that we've had 2,000 plus years of Hellenism. This generation is going to let it die? No way in hell are we going to let that happen. And you're going to tell me that the Greek state and the problems that it's facing today, okay, are more than the problems of civil wars, of occupations, of famine, and of losing a whole diaspora the way we are here and the way we are in America? No, I don't think so. We cannot let that legacy die, and if we do, we have no one to blame but ourselves. And there's no way in hell we're going to let that happen, right? So with that, I'm going to let you go.